We have Joe. Vaszily is going to talk to us about a topic that was sent in at the last minute, interpreting the rulebook into actionable steps and utilizing the performance guidelines rubric to break down film.
Yeah, Carrie, thanks, and I appreciate everybody hanging in tonight. It's been a great session so far. I will try not to keep everybody too much longer. You know, it was interesting when I was thinking about this topic and I saw it. I've probably read it about 15 different times, trying to figure out how I wanted to talk about and break down the two things. You know, the first piece of this, interpreting the rule book into actionable steps. You know, the first thing that immediately popped into my mind is, you know, how do I break down the rule book in terms of, you know, how do I read it and study it? And I know, you know, we've had John Levinson on, and he's kind of shown us, you know, how he, you know, one of the ways of how he kind of breaks down the rule book in terms of reading it. You know, for me, typically, I read a rule, and then I go to the case book, and I read all the case plays that go along with it. And so I think that's part of how I break down the rule book, to kind of just reinforce, you know, what I've read, so that I can see, you know, in illustrations, you know, how John is John actually writing these rules. And I think that's the best way for me to describe, you know, an actionable step. Because if you try to read the rule book, you know, kind of like the Bible, you know, from the beginning to the end, you know, you're going to get about a chapter in and you're going to be like, okay, I'm done, you know. And so, you know, the same way with the rule book, I think you've got to go back, you've got to find illustrations and ways to, you know, bring to life what some of these rules are saying. And obviously we know, you know, and I'm not saying one rule is more important than the other, but, you know, just looking at rule one, it's equipment and, you know, kind of uniforms, and, you know, this picture of the uniform this past season with 50 different bullet points on it, you know, really just trying to understand, okay, what's really, this color has to be the same color, but undershirts have to be, they don't have to be, short sleeve undershirts don't have to be compression, but long sleeve undershirts have to be compression, you know, all those kind of things. You know, you're like, you really, you know, I said to John after the first season, I said, you got a picture in this locker room, and it happened to be where Stephanie and I, the first weekend of the season, you got a picture of a player with 50 bullet points on them. I mean, how are we supposed to enforce 50 bullet points? You know, you know, and so, you know, we've laughed about it. But again, I think when you go back and forth from the rule book to case plays, and when something doesn't make sense and you can find that illustration for it, it really helps me break it down into an actionable step that brings the rule to life, so that I can really see, you know, how it's being, you know, played. One of the things somebody, you know, in this piece that they asked, said call consistency and sequencing of events. There are some rules that are specifically related to what we call, okay? And to me, that's rule 9 and 10. That's violations and fouls, okay? And that's primarily, you know, what we put most of our whistles on. And so, you know, kind of when you look at 9 and 10, right, we've really got to know the ins and outs. And that's why I've spent years, these last few years in Magbo, talking about legal guarding and screening, and really knowing word for word what those rules say. What is a, you know, what is a legal defender? How do you establish? How do you maintain? Stephanie did an awesome job on screening, you know, in terms of, you know, how do you, you know, when you set a legal screen on a moving opponent versus a stationary opponent, what are you allowed to do? You know, is a blind screen applicable to stationary, you know, defenders or moving opponents? Okay, and all those kinds of things. You know, that stuff should be rolling off our tongues, so that when we put our air in the whistle, and a coach says to me, "What did my player do wrong?" you are able to spit out that rule the way it's written, and that's when the coordinators like Chris Kelly and others and Fran, they can support you because you use rules-backed language to explain what you just put air in the whistle on. So when you look at call consistency, you know, that's where 9 and 10 really come in, okay? And, you know, as Scott alluded to and some have put it in the chat already, I believe that in our game, traveling has become the hardest play to call. And that's because, you know, we have pre-dribble travels, we have post-dribble travels, and really finding that foot, and it's become an exercise. And, you know, we didn't have any in-person camps, but in these last 2 summers, I've spent a lot of time, just as I've watched games, just saying to myself, and I've said to people, when you come off the floor or you watch a game, just take a minute of that game, okay? Whether it's on video or it's live in person in a summer league or whatever it is, and just take 1 minute and say, every time a person in your primary catches the ball, say to yourself, right foot or left foot. That becomes, and that's how we train the brain, okay? And yes, is it easier to call traveling from here than it is live? Absolutely. And sometimes the faster our student athletes, they're getting faster and faster and quicker, and they can shuffle and shift that pivot foot ever so slightly. We have post players that catch, they reverse pivot away from the basket. Why are they reverse pivoting away from the basket? Really because they want to switch their pivot foot and get it on, whether if they're righty, they want it on the left, or lefty, they want it on the right. That's why they're reverse pivoting away from the basket. And it's so subtle sometimes that we don't even pick up on it. Okay, but that's why having this thing in your head where knowing if a righty catches on the right or left, and lefty if they catch on the right or the left, it will help you in seeing some of these travels. We still may not call all of them. And again, it comes down to kind of consistency within our crew, and that's why it's so important at the beginning of a game is to establish and get those obvious travels, okay? As well as every other piece of the game that's important for us, okay? Sequence of events was the other piece of this kind of first rule, actionable steps. And I would just say sequencing events to me is we got layered plays that happen in our game. Reaction and chain reaction kind of things, that happen, or, whistle for a foul, and then we get extracurricular activity after the play, and then knowing how to adjudicate those things. And, for lesser experienced officials, those become, you go into panic mode. And even veteran officials, when you got multiple layer plays, your head starts spinning in 1,000 directions. Yes, we have the monitor. We can go look at it. When you don't have a monitor, the onus becomes on you and the crew, and it becomes that much harder. But taking your time and just knowing that, you've got to kind of layer it out. What happened, and then what were the chain reactions? And now we've made the rule a lot simpler. We basically are going to come out of almost any kind of layered play with either no free throws or only one team shooting free throws. There are very few situations where we're going to be shooting multiple type free throws. And so again, going back to kind of, those equal gravity type plays, I believe it's in Rule 7, and all the stuff that's on Arbiter that John's posted, kind of all those things will help you. Anything that John posts, that's either kind of interpretations or rules kind of plays or sequences, you should print those things out and have them handy in your book, because you never know when they're going to come in handy, okay? The other piece of, this topic that was sent in was utilizing the performance guidelines rubric to break down game film and reflect or rate performance, okay? And every coordinator, I will tell you, probably grades things a little bit differently. We generally in Division I have 4 categories: correct call, incorrect call, that's when we blow the whistle, and then no call incorrect and no call correct when we don't blow the whistle. Some supervisors will not give you credit on no call corrects because they don't know if you were lucky or you just actually thought about it and you didn't put air in the whistle. The NCAA grades our correct calls with out of bounds. I don't particularly, unless it's really majorly obvious, when I'm grading myself, I don't necessarily grade out of bounds plays. I just think it takes too much time. But clearly, to me, the 3 things that are most important are the 2 categories: when we blow the whistle, call incorrect, call correct, and our no call incorrects when we don't blow the whistle and we should have. And I'll tell you this: I graded myself on the ACC championship game back in March. The most no call incorrects I have were on traveling, and there were at least 3 of them, and I think they were all pre-dribble travels. Okay, when we put air in the whistle in that game, I think we were in the mid-90s. Okay, and most games, I think you'll find when you put air in the whistle, because when we put air in the whistle, we're 100% sure, sometimes 150, sometimes 200% when we're coming out of our primary. But when we referee our primary strong, we get a lot of plays right. We get most plays right. Our percentages come down, and it's, whatever you look at. The NCAA tournament, we're 94, 95%. Most leagues were in the mid-90s. When you factor in our no call incorrects, we're down into the mid-80s. And again, a lot of that is around traveling. Traveling and screening is kind of the 2 big areas where over the past years, we've gotten better, but where we still need to get better and improve, okay? And so, when you're looking at a rubric, I would say to you, if you have the ability and you have video available, it's hard to watch a whole game and grade it. It takes time. I mean, when I was doing some grading over the summer for a couple of camps that I worked, I spent 2 to 2.5 hours on a game, and it takes a while. If you're going to do it right, give yourself the time and the window. You can't rush it. And I mean, I was doing a quarter at a time, and I was going back, and we got the ability to slow it down and kind of look at things. And if I have to look at something 5 times, I give you the benefit of the doubt. I give myself the benefit of the doubt. But seeing it in real time and that's to me where we've got to grade ourselves. And again, like I said, if you got to watch it 5 times in slow motion, same with traveling. 5 times in slow motion to find out where she ended the dribble. We talked a lot about traveling tonight. Where our rule book is the pivot foot is when she ends her dribble. So where does she end the dribble? It's not the gather. That's in another league. There's no 0 step. That's in the pros. Maybe someday we'll have it. I hope, honestly, we do. But for the time being, we got to find the pivot foot when she ends her dribble. It's very simple. Just know the rule, okay? And that's where we will get those post dribbles right. The pre-dribble travels, to me, split steps, going before you put the ball down. Those are, if you find the foot, you'll get them right. I guarantee you. Where she ends those dribbles, especially in the lane area where there's a lot of congestion, a lot of people, sometimes it's hard. And again, if you got to slow it down 4 or 5 times, the player gets the benefit of the doubt. And I think every coordinator in the country will agree with you on that. So, that being said, I'll end there on terms of kind of going through that topic. But if anybody has questions, please put it in. I just had a question. When you're in season, are you watching full games in review, especially when you have to quick turnaround? The answer is no. There are games where I will watch more than others. Close games, 8 to 10 point games, critical plays at the end of a game, close games where we had a call or no call. That stuff we look at right away in the locker room before we even leave, like that illegal screen. That coordinator had the play before we even left the locker room. Okay. If I'm flying out, some of it will depend on travel, and if I'm flying the next night, or if I'm flying that night, or flying the next day, kind of will again give me some time to look at some stuff. So in season, it's very hard to watch a full game unless I feel like. And there was a game this season in December where I watched the whole game. I watched half of it that afternoon in the airport, because I just didn't think we were very good. And your gut will tell you when you're good, when you're okay, and when you're not very good. And those days when the crew is not very good and on the same page, you owe it to yourself, the crew, and the student athletes, and your coordinator, and the coaches of those 2 teams to break that game film down and see where we needed to do better. Because your gut usually doesn't tell you. Your gut usually doesn't lie. Now, I will tell you this, that it's never as bad as you think it is. Because it wasn't as bad as I thought it was, but we still weren't very good. Okay, so your gut's not going to lie completely, but there are nights where we're just not very good. Okay, and it's sometimes the game dictates that, and those are the hard games, and we just got to work extra hard and really break the game down into short segments. But you owe it, like I said, you owe it to all the constituents in that game and the crews that follow you to break that game film down. So. Any other? Oh, you're welcome, Ashley. Any other questions before I move on? Ralph, we'll try to go through this as quickly as possible because it is bumping up against 9 o'clock. And I'll just spend a little bit of time talking about the RA. And for those of you who are aspiring to the college, we have a 4-foot restricted area. Thankfully, it's the same one as the men. We don't have 2 lines anymore. Back in the day, and I think in this first play, this Pittsburgh play that I had, you'll notice that actually I think that it was the first year where we didn't have the 2 lines. We're back to the 1 line. So you will find your rule references for the RA in Rule 10 under guarding, okay, and that's on page 89 in the rule book, Article 7. And then you have 429, and I'll give you the page. And these are just some rule numbers that you just memorize. 429 is on page 52, and that's secondary defender. Okay. There's 2 components to the restricted area. It's obviously knowing whether it's a primary or secondary defender. If it's a primary defender, there is no restricted area. The restricted area has to do with secondary defenders. That's one piece. And the second piece is whether or not the offensive player starts inside the lower defensive box or out. And if Ralph has his cursor, he can show us the two tick marks on the baseline, which are, as you can see them, those are, there you go. Thank you, Ralph. Those are the tick marks to denote where the restricted area, where the lower defensive box starts. And then our second lane space, the second line there, the second thin line, Ralph, just where the ACC, the top of the C is. There you go. Nope, over here, one more down. That second lane space line, the white mark, there you go, right there. So inside there and inside the tick marks on the end line to denote the lower defensive box. So drives that start outside, where this one starts right here on center side, is a drive that starts outside the lower defensive box, which means the restricted area is in play. That secondary defender who's coming over to help to take a charge, as you see there, her heels are on the restricted area, which means that as much as I would love to call a charging foul, since she runs her over, she's in the restricted area and she cannot play. She cannot be a secondary defender in the restricted area, so this is a block. What's neat about this play is it illustrates two things from our camp teaching. Well, one from our camp teaching points. We've been in there the last couple of years. Is that even though the drive starts on the center side, when the secondary defender comes from the lead's primary, we want the lead to have first crack at this. Now, I need to get my arm up in the air to denote that this is a blocking foul and then point to the restricted area. Sometimes I have a bad habit of calling a block immediately. Now, my supervisor gave me the benefit of the doubt because the ball was about to hit me, and so I went to catch it before I put my arm up, but the reality is I probably wasn't putting my arm up anyway. I was calling a block and in the restricted area. If you look at my positioning, I'm off the end line, which I've said many times over, when you have the space to get off the end line, you're going to get these plays right. If I'm on the end line as lead and in that same position, but 3 steps forward, I may not get that right because I don't have that lane of vision and really that depth perception to not only referee her, but referee her feet. The neat part about this, just lastly, this is at 1:19 in the fourth quarter in a 3-point game. And this is one of those plays they put in that in the last 2 minutes, we are able to review RA plays. Now, I was 99.9% sure she was in the restricted area. She was down on the floor for a minute because she hit her head. So I used that time to go and confirm that she was in the restricted area. And she was. And so that's the beauty of it in the last 2 minutes, having a monitor. You are able to review these plays. And you're able to change them if she was not in the restricted area. You cannot re-referee the play. You can only re-referee. You cannot re-referee whether it's a block or a charge. You can only referee the location of the defender and the location of the offensive player and where she started the drive. Because I called a restricted area block. And so the only way I'd be able to change this to a charge is if her feet were outside the restricted area, because I didn't call. Now, if I had called a block, straight up block, you cannot review it. You can only review it if I had called a restricted area block, or if I called a charge, I could go and see that her feet were in the restricted area, and then we would change the charge to we would change the charging foul to a restricted area block. Okay, next one, Ralph. I'm sorry I'm going a little bit over here. I appreciate everyone that's hanging in there. It will be no more than 5 more minutes. And again, another demonstrative restricted area block. And I think I had this one. Oh, no, I didn't. I actually had another view from the baseline, but I didn't send that one to Ralph. And again, another run over play, but you can see where White starts to drive. She's already way out there. So the lower defensive, she's clearly outside the lower defensive box. And again, our secondary defender steps in and she slides over and her feet are on the restricted area on the arc. And again, not a difficult call, but again, I'm trying to get myself in good position there to back off the end line and get a little wide. And I think if I had stayed if I had stayed where I was, kind of pinched the paint, I might have been closed off by 23 blue, who was also standing right there. And she may have blocked my view from seeing that defender. So again, try to get off the end line. And remember, she was on the left side coming up the floor. So I position adjusted quickly to get wider and just wide enough to see where her feet were. All right, Ralph, next one. Two more. This was a great play I had, and this is when we had the two lines. And it was and again, you can see that I called the charge. I didn't pick up her feet. Now you see the center walking in, who has a great look at the defender's feet, the help defender. And again, this is another play where the drive starts clearly from outside the lower defensive box. And again, on the restricted area, she's coming in. She sets up late. This happened to be the same defender in the last play, the Louisville play. She had a tendency to like to take charges, but not get out of the restricted area. So again, but this is a great example of a play where when the center's engaged and there's a lot of traffic in there, and I got to tell you, I'm probably not in the best position there. I'm kind of pinched the paint. Because again, it was on the weak side coming over, and I just didn't position adjust in time. But there are 4 defenders there for blue, and sometimes it's hard to find the feet, and that's why when we get help from the outside, we say thank you very much for finding those feet. And she came in right away. She came in and gave the information. 21 Blues feet were on the line, were on the restricted area, and I made and then I make the change, and I change the call, blow my whistle. After she gives me the information, and I put my fist up, call blocking foul, I point down to the ground for the restricted area, and then we go from there. So yes, Sherry, this call was changed from a charge to a restricted area block. You're welcome. All right, Ralph, last one. And this was from just this was in February, actually, in a 2-point game in the fourth quarter. And again, once again, I don't get my arms up. Ralph's going to run it in slow motion. Clearly, again, starts way outside the lower defensive box. Here comes help side defender, number 2. And you'll see that her feet are clearly inside the restricted area. And Cameron is doing a great job in trail, kind of walking down towards the play. Because the center, I think, there's too many bodies in there for the center to have a real good look. Cameron actually had a good look. And again, if I had the baseline angle, I would show you. As I'm walking to the table, Cameron's already nodding her head. And I knew she was in the restricted area, so I didn't need to go and look at this. But again, this would be another play, 44.5 in the fourth quarter, where we could go look at this type of play if we needed to, because it's in the last 2 minutes of the fourth period. If we needed to, we could go and look at the monitor. But we did not need to go to look at the monitor because I was 150% sure that she was in the restricted area. So. And as Carl wrote in the chat, great, and I'm glad he said that, in, on, or over the RA is illegal, and that's been a test question on our preseason test for the last, I don't know how many years. John always liked to sneak in the over. And so, again, for those aspiring to the college level, the restricted area is, we're getting more and more players who are trying to take charges. We've got to find the foot, we got to find the feet on secondary defender. We got to referee the legality of the play. But as you're finding the defender's feet and whether they're established prior to a player going airborne, you also need to find their feet when the plays are around the basket.
So, Joe, question. Even though you're 150%,
Yeah, Sherry.
even though you're 150% sure that she was in the ARC or the RA, if a coach asked you to review that within the 2 minutes, do you have to go to the monitor, or can't you?
Oh, there's Ralph. Oh, Ralph, you ran it to the end there, right? Yeah, that's good, Ralph, because that showed that baseline. Oh, Sherry, I'll get to you in a second. I'm sorry. Ralph's got the baseline look here, too, on this play. Yeah, Sherry, I would just say this. My response always on these types of plays is, coaches can ask us to review certain things, and if they're wrong, they lose the timeout. If I'm 250%, if I'm 150% sure, my first reaction or my first response to a coach, depending on the rapport I have with them, is, Coach, I am 150% sure she was in the restricted area. And on a play like that, where it's not even, her feet aren't even on the line, they're actually both inside the line there. These are types of plays where I'm really going to be fairly, I don't want to say stern, but I'm going to be confident in how I respond to a coach. If I have any doubt in my mind, or my partners do, well, then by all means, that's what the monitor is for. It's used to be a tool. But certain types of things like this, for me, I think when we go to the monitor, we just slow the game down. And I think, in the interest of, we want our game to have pace and we want it to flow. And I think even a coach like that, he or she's going to look up at the monitor in an arena like that and see the replay and know that his or her player was in the restricted area, and they're not going to ask.
Okay.
But it's a great question. And like I said, if you have any doubt, the monitor is there for us as a tool on these types of plays. Because the other flip side of that is the coach who didn't, the coach at the other end is saying, are you going to charge them a timeout? Are you charging them a timeout? And then you got to be quick with your response and say, no, Coach, I'm going on my own volition. Or Coach, I had doubt. That's why I'm going to look. Because it looks bad for us when a coach asks us to look at something and then we go look and they're wrong and we don't charge them a timeout. How are you going to respond to the other coach? Are you charging them a timeout? Oh no, Coach, I went on my own volition. Well, then why did you wait for them to ask you, right? So you got to be sensitive to that, and that's where your partners can really come in and help you on whether or not you should use the monitor as a tool in certain situations. So. Any last questions on that before I hand it back to Carrie to wrap it up?
Thanks, Kevin. Joe, another great job by you.
By everyone. Thanks.